recording this on YouTube. And so at some point, then, these are all on YouTube, or at least this one is. And that's thanks to my partner, Mr. Frank the Verse Thomas. And I've had a couple comments that the TV cameras are not in the best place. I know this is a brand new studio, and I really like the way that it's been built. And technically, it's a superb studio. But the one thing we haven't done very well, or I haven't done very well, is to situate the cameras. But on the other hand, I'm a radio guy, so having this big microphone down in front of me makes sense. Now, in the old days, when we did this, the 10 years previous, when we had the green screen studio, the only difference is the microphones came from the table up. And so they don't come down. And I don't know if I could make this do that or not, but I got a face for radio anyway. It doesn't matter. All right. Can you believe, I think isn't Christmas Eve a week from today? 24th, right? 17th, 18th, 19th, 21, 22. Yeah, Christmas Eve is a week from today. Crazy. Anyway, I'm stalling because today's subject is going to make me, probably going to make me cry, and I don't have a problem crying in front of people. If you don't like it, shut it off. I don't mean to be rude, but seriously, I got no man card here that I need to turn in because I shed a tear. So I wrote this book called The Legitimate Bastard. And it was a book that originally was pretty vindictive. It's my story. My health is such that I know that my life is not going to go till I'm 80, 90 years old. And so I just thought at this point in my life I'd write that book. Well, I went to publish it, and a friend of mine, Ken, told me, don't publish this book. Just put it on the shelf and think about it for a year. And that was hard to take because I had worked years on this. Tim Moline had helped me as my ghostwriter, and I was going to self-publish and everything was set up. But when Ken told me that, I took it seriously. Well, during that time, I did place some very vanilla stuff on Facebook. And an acquaintance of mine down in Dallas, Texas, got a hold of me and said, "So who's publishing your book?" And I said, I'm not going to go after a publisher. I'm not writing a top 10 book. I'm not writing a book that needs, book signings. I hate those. I mean, if you want me to put my signature on my book for you, I will, but I'm going to address it to you. Just writing my name just seems fake to me. I've never liked that. Even though I have to admit I collected autographs for many years from country music stars and rock and roll stars, and maybe that's why I don't like it. I don't know. But anyway, so I didn't need a publisher. And he said, "Well, let me call my publisher." And he said, "If you'll send me the book, the transcript, I'll send it over to him. And what do I care? Okay, I'll do it. Thanks. Bye." And I'll be honest with you, I don't even think about it. My head is really wrapped around. Sorry, my elbow itches. My head is really wrapped around what Ken had told me about the book, because I wanted I wanted this book to help people. I wanted it to help people with mental illness who have gone through adoption or an orphanage, dysfunctional family, business, alcoholism, mental illness. I said that already, didn't I? Alcoholism, and then eventually, getting mugged by Jesus. And that'll come later, or, that's a story I love to tell. So maybe I'll tell that here in the next couple of days. It is in the book. It's clear in the end, but it might help you understand why I'm doing it the way I have. Thank you, Jolene. Okay, I appreciate that. So I get this call from this guy at the publishing company. Totally forget that I'd even sent this to this guy. The guy's a nice guy, don't get me wrong, and he changed my life, and so I'm very thankful for that, but I just didn't give it a second thought because I wasn't writing a book. The idea of being a published author meant zip to me. Oh, sure, there were times when I thought that'd be fun or cool, and I've talked about this before, but I really wanted to help people. I wanted to take what my experiences had been in life and help people, but I did it with a, what do they call, left-handed compliments all over the place? Yeah, and it was... So I get a call from this guy at the publishing house, and he's got a southern accent, and he says, well, I got good news. Actually, what I got a call from is I got a call from his secretary asking if I'd be available like this Thursday at 10 a.m. Sure, and I'm a little interested now, but we'll see what happens. I mean, I think if they were going to send me a rejection letter, they wouldn't have called me, but who knows? People are weird, me included. And so I get this call, and we have niceties, and there's 2 or 3 people sitting around the table, and finally this guy says, I got good news and bad news. Oh, good. I love it when people start that. The good news is we love your story. It fits in what we do here, and we want to print it. Okay, great. What's the bad news? You can't write with a hoot. What? He said, you're a radio guy, man. You can't write with a hoot. He said, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to get you a ghostwriter. And basically a ghostwriter is somebody you tell your story to, and they take notes, or nowadays they can record it, and then they write it in their own style, and you have a good story written well. Well, publisher is Salem, which is the largest Christian broadcast publishing company in the world. Top integrity. So I didn't have any problem with that, but what I didn't realize was happening is I was going to get a ghostwriter that was going to teach me to write. He is a former pastor, PhD, just an awesome guy. He changed the direction of the book. First time that he listened to me about the book, he said, well, this book is about forgiveness. This book is not about Mac McCoy. This book is about the journey that God put you on to learn forgiveness, because my forgiver was broken. Does that make sense? You know, I didn't have a conscience, and my forgiver was broken. That tells you the kind of crappy guy I was. And so over the course of the last 15 months, I told him my story, but at the end of every day, and I figured it out after like 3 days, but he'd say, okay, now write it. I said, I can't write that. That's your job. You know, I'd get a little Mac in me, and it's your job. You do it. And he'd say, okay, well, then let Jesus write it. Oh, G-money. That means I got to do it. Well, long story short, the book came out far better than I could ever imagine. And it's not a great book. It's not going to sell. It's not what it's here for. But I've already heard from people that they've got some insight into sexual abuse, or insight into family or radio, or, you know, it's making a difference, and that's all I care about. Today's topic is one that is really hard for me to talk about because it's fresh. Yes, I found out 20 years ago that my adopted father sexually abused not only his 3 kids, maybe more, and was certainly a man who was just not a good guy. He's a good guy outside, very successful, money, family. Everything looked great, but literally he had a speakeasy back in my hometown of Beatrice, Nebraska, above the car dealership, and it wasn't any secret in town that the ladies of the evening, unhappy housewives, and somebody passing through knew they could go up there, and Earl Penner would put some jingle in their pocket for some favors exchanged. I could look up exactly what I called him in the book. I probably called him a pervert. But my Uncle Bob, his oldest son, told me this and didn't tell me so I'd write a book. In fact, asked me not to tell anybody until after he was dead and gone. And quite frankly, he's been dead and gone probably 10 years. And until this publisher came along and put Jesus in the middle between me and them and said, let Jesus write the book. Jesus knows the story. You don't have to tell Jesus the story. It's like telling Jesus what you want and making him laugh. Just follow our process. We know what we're doing. And so I did. Hard for me to do. I've been an entrepreneur all my life. I do things my way. But this time I did my best to let Jesus do it. And it took almost 5 years. 5 years of my life. And I worked on this book probably every day. And here's the funny part. It's 150 pages. It's a large font. I think it's 14. And it takes the average person somewhere around 3.5 hours to read. It's not a novel. It is a journal, a fictional journal, autobiography, whatever term you want to use, about a little boy who grew up to be a man, but still had a little boy living inside of me. And I went through years and years and years and years and years and years and years of therapy. Years. Most of them with the same guy. Once he diagnosed me with a mental illness called borderline personality disorder, and he explained to me, and I did some research, it was obvious he knew what he was talking about. And here we are 20-some years later, and I still see him at least a couple times a month. Used to be a couple times a week. He helped me to understand my mental illness. I actually went to him in 1998, and said, I want to quit drinking. I've been drinking for 4 or 5 years now, and I don't like it. It doesn't do anything for me. I do it to excess. Can you help me stop drinking? He said, sure, I can do that. And we went through 2 or 3 or 4 sessions, and he came back and he said, well, yeah, here it is again. I got good news and bad news. That's weird. They both said that. I just thought about that. The good news is I have a diagnosis for you. You have borderline personality disorder. He gave me some paperwork and my own copy of the DSM. I think we were on 3 at the time. And but the bad news is you drink because of your mental illness. Now, what I've learned is most people drink because of something else. There are very few people that drink because they need alcohol. Yes, they are those people that get to themselves in that place, the binges. Maybe you've had one. I didn't like binges. The binges made my head hurt. I was functional. I could get up in the morning and do 8, 10, 12 hours worth of work, not impact hardly anybody around me. Or I thought, operative phrase, or I thought, and still be functional. So how in God's name could I be an alcoholic? Alcoholics live under the bridge and have little brown paper bags. Well, that's not who they are. And I talk about that in the book, and I'll talk about it one of these days here on this broadcast. But I digress. 16 minutes after 10, 17th day of December in 2019. J. Michael McCoy, talking about a book that I wrote, The Legitimate Bastard, Living Free Through Forgiveness. And that's the operative phrase, living free through forgiveness. So for 20-some years, I've known that my adopted grandfather, my mother's father, my adopted mother's father. I know that sounds confusing. It just is what it is. I don't know how. I'm not going to tell you my mom and have you understand it because you were listening that day, and then have somebody who listens for the first time tomorrow and said, which mom? Wait a minute. He's got 2. I've got a biological mother who gave birth to me, who gave me up, and I didn't know until I was 18 years old. And then I have the mother who adopted me and has been in my life for 60 some years. She's 89 and still living. And my grandfather, her dad, sexually abused a lot of people around. I have no idea how deep this goes. I don't know if I'm going to have people come out of Beatrice and say, yeah, he has sexually assaulted me when I was 16 years old, or I was 20 years old, or I don't know. I was 5 years old. I don't know. But I do know that I've been contacted by a couple, and people who have read the transcript or listened to the broadcast, I've been contacted by two different people. One is a woman about my mother's age who thanked her through me. In other words, I passed this on to her. Thanked her for being so brave as to come out of the closet and discuss this. The second was a husband who thought his wife had probably been sexually abused, but had not ever asked her about it. And after he read the book and heard me talking about it, realized that some of the symptoms were there. Going back to the alcohol for just a second. So basically, Phil and I spent the next 10 years going through borderline personality disorder. And then one December in 2009, he said, you're in remission from borderline. You've done great. Hardly anybody does that. I'm not going to go on and on about that, but it's pretty cool what he did for me. I didn't do it. God did it, and he worked through Phil. That's my guy. And no, not that Dr. Phil, silly boy. And he said, now you have to quit drinking. And it took me about 4 months to put the plug in the jug, and I was sober starting on May 10th of 2010 until, I did real good for about 6 years, and then I've been on and off, and that's another story. During my recovery from borderline, I learned about my mother and my adopted mother and the kind of house I grew up in. And it was never clear to me until I went into therapy. This is just amazing. You know, I was the victim in this house. It started out when I was a little boy, didn't get enough attention. My sister was the most important. I was adopted, and I knew that from the day not from the day I was born, but the first page in my baby book was the letter from the orphanage to my parents when I was 6 months old or whatever it was, saying, hey, we got this baby boy for you. So I always knew I was adopted, and I used to say that if I could change anything in my life, I'd take that knowledge away. Now, I later learned in therapy that my mother didn't choose to put that letter in the book. That was what the adoption agency said she should do. And when my sister was hatched, in other words, mom and dad weren't supposed to have kids. 4 years later, I guess they fooled around, and mom got pregnant and had a daughter, and my sister was very sick, and I was not emotionally capable of handling it. The only person that helped me handle it was my grandmother on my father's side. And when she died when I was 9 years old, I lost it. I mean, that was the end of me ever trusting in Jesus or a higher power. Even though I knew who God was, it was my grandmother who introduced me to Jesus and kept telling me about Jesus, and now Jesus took her away from me. And I didn't understand any of this. I was a broken, upset young man who had it piled and piled and piled and piled and piled on top, and never had an understanding of anything until I was 50 years old, 49 years old. The only person I ever told about what my uncle had told me was my therapist, and it took me a couple years to do it, and he kind of chewed my butt for it too. He said, I wish we would have known this, because I've been trying to find a nice way to tell you. But it was obvious to him that there was some sexual abuse inside of my mother's history, because her actions were very, the characteristics was very there of someone who had been sexually abused. And alcoholism and, two sides, the wonderful laughing mom with a drink in her hand, and then the crying. I don't remember my mother being very happy at all, ever, unless she was with her brother, the brother that eventually brought me out and told me this whole story. To move ahead, just so you know, my mother did not know I knew until about, I think it was October of this year, because I had a come to Jesus meeting, and I realized I was about to print a book that had real damaging information about our background. And everybody's dead, so nobody's going to get hurt, there is, even in murder, there's a time limit. And yes, I just jumped ahead a minute, but my mother's father was murdered by my older uncle, her older brother, and my grandma, because she walked in on him with another woman at this speakeasy, and she was humiliated. We talked about this later. So on a Saturday morning, I called my mother and said, Mom, I got to tell you about this book that I'm writing, and it's going to go to publish next week. And here's the Holy Spirit working inside. I had every intention of saying to my mother, and if you don't like what I'm going to tell you that's in the book, I'm sorry, Mom, but it's already done and I made the decision. Here's what came out of my mouth. It's just crazy, man. Mom, if you want me to take this whole thing out of the book, I will, because I do not want to hurt you. I'm not kidding you. Holy Spirit, right? I don't know. I'm not a smart guy. Well, my mother had never told anybody. For basically 84 years, she had kept it quiet. Now, my father knew, and her brothers knew, but my little sister, who's almost 60 years old, never knew. And that has caused a real division between her and I, because she's just shocked that this happened, and why didn't she know about it, and why didn't I tell her? And I love my sister dearly, and she's just reaching. She's not in a good place. But she's going to need her own therapy, because piece by piece, this has got to come together for her, and she's got to realize you kind of have to rewrite your childhood when you realize that your parent was really broken. They weren't just bad parents. My mother did better than anybody, I think, could do, given the pain and the brokenness she had. I grew up and I never heard my grandfather's name. We never talked about Grandpa around the table, even at Christmas or Thanksgiving. And I didn't know. I knew that he died on Mother's Day in 1958, but I didn't know how, and I didn't know why. All right. So what I want to share, once again, my book's a little different. When I talk about alcoholism, I don't start every paragraph with, well, then there was this day that I drank this too much, or I drank too much of this, or I did this, or I was in a... No, that's not the book. The book on alcohol, or the chapter on alcoholism, is how society deals with it, and giving people an insight to what it's like to be publicly outed. Well, I did it. I talked. But to be publicly alcoholic, it's a rough world. Okay. It's like any other thing that we're embarrassed about. There are many other things that this could be. And, one of them is sexual abuse. We just don't talk about it. And you think the Me movement brought it out? No, they really didn't. That was a political hailstorm of very angry people trying to get back at people. When my mother and I got on that phone that day and I read to her what I wrote, these were, and by the way, I recognize this in the book because this was an amazing day. Because the Holy Spirit had changed. That's just crazy. I'm not going to change a thing in the book, Mom, if you don't like it. To, Mom, I'll edit out the whole thing if it hurts you. In the first and only time we're probably ever going to talk about this, my mother said, quote, "My dad was a bad man. What you're writing is all true. Go ahead." And at that moment, my mother did the most unselfish thing I can ever imagine her doing. And she did it to help you. She didn't do it to help me. She did it to help somebody out there who has taken this secret and hidden it for 100 years. Literally 84, 85 years. She did it for you so you could understand maybe why your family was dysfunctional. I mean, once my therapist diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder, and then we talked about the sexual abuse, and you know, we all think, oh, well, when you talk about sexual abuse, that means somebody sexual abused me, and oh, no, Grandpa didn't do that, nobody touched me, da 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 da. And whether that's true or not, the point is that's what people say. I don't believe I was ever sexually abused. In fact, I'm 99.99. I don't think it happened. It didn't happen. Nobody ever told me it happened. I guess I should say I'm 100% sure. But see, then all the psycho people come in and go, well, now 100%, you can't be all or nothing. So I'm 99 point affinity. But what I didn't realize is how my mother's sexual abuse would impact me as a kid, me as a husband, me as a father, me as a grandfather, and how literally we move that bar to the point now where I believe, well, I don't believe, I know, that the atmosphere that I was raised in, even though I was not sexually abused, is having an impact on my grandchildren. Crazy. Oh, I can see it in my kids. That's... we've spent years in therapy talking about that because I wanted to go fix it. Well, I couldn't fix it. It wasn't my fault. Just as my mother was a victim, I was a victim. Now, does that excuse all the crappy things I said and did? Absolutely not. I found therapy. I got well. I'm doing the best I can. Some people throw you away when they realize you're broken. Some people use you and manipulate you, and they as long as they can manipulate that brokenness. You know, and let's break this down real simple. You drink too much, and so they come to the bar and they make you buy all the drinks because they know you're going to drink too much. That's an easy way. The other way is you're in this person's life, and as long as you can manipulate them as a spouse or a child or a boss, then that relationship will be fine. But as soon as they can't manipulate you anymore, they're out the door. So what amazes me is what happened in the 1940s. You know, 70, 75, 85 years. It was 85 years ago. She was 4 years old when she recalls him starting this. If any of this is making your head jingle a little bit, or even worse, maybe convicting you, if you have someone in your family, and it could be a man or a woman, we know that in 2020. Sexual abuse is not just limited to women. Both of my mother's brothers, older Uncle Bob, younger Uncle Bill, were also sexually abused by their father. And that's just yucky too. I mean, they're both yucky. I mean, you're already at a 11 on a scale of 1 to 10 for yucky. If any of this rings a bell for you, I'm here to help you. Now, what I'm eventually going to do is ask you to find a therapist, or I'll recommend one or whatever, because this is not, you're not fooling around here. You know, you don't have a bad habit of saying a swear word when you get mad. Or you don't have a bad habit of saying something crappy to your spouse. You have something inside of you that changes our whole outlook on the world. And that's, I mean, my mother, I love my mother to this day, but my mother's broken, and she was never given a way out. And I don't know how old you are right now. Maybe you're 17 and listening to this, and your grandfather sexually abused, or your father or a neighbor sexually abused you. Good job. Step forward. I don't mean publicly. This is not the Me movement. The Me movement was about vengeance. You know, I went through a very difficult divorce, and never mind. I just found out things that no husband should ever know about his wife. And we don't get to be on the other side in the Me generation or the Me society. It's all the guy's fault. No matter what, it's all the guy's fault. So I'll take that. I would recommend lie detector tests. But I digress. If you're 17 and this is reminding you of something very ugly, or it was your sister or your cousin or something, this isn't about you shouting forward and putting up a billboard that says, I had an abortion, or look at me, I was abused by so-and-so. No, this is about you getting help. And vengeance is a fleshy way of getting help. The right way of getting help is through forgiveness. Whoa. I just went there, didn't I? Yeah, well, Jesus came and said, I will forgive you as you forgive others. Now, he didn't say, well, if you got a hard forgiver, I might let you go on that one. Because, Mac, you're not going to give me any hard forgivers. I mean, you're not going to do anything, excuse me, you're not going to do anything so bad that, you know, I'm going to have to not forgive you. I'll always forgive you. So the thing, you know, Jesus died on the cross. Think about this for a moment. Jesus went through what he went through and died on the cross for one reason: love, grace, and forgiveness. And that's not three reasons, that's one. Because you can't have forgiveness unless you have grace, and you can't have grace unless you have love. When your hate meter is higher than your love meter, grace isn't possible, because you'll always say, well, you know, I'm really sorry that I did that, and it's my bad, I did that, and I shouldn't have done that, but if you hadn't done that, or you hadn't said that, then I wouldn't have done what I did. So it's really not my fault, it's your fault. At least we're going to share blame. No, Jesus teaches us to take responsibility for our actions. Even when we are the victim, we have to look and have empathy for that person who did what they did to us, because they're probably as broken as we are or more. All the things that I endured as a child, and then in my 20s and my 30s, you know, even into my 40s, all those things I endured as a child were because my mother was broken. And I had to change out the resentment rock to the forgiveness rock. And forgiveness isn't for the guy that pulled out in front of you at the Casey's. It can be. If that's your big deal, that's okay. Forgiveness is for anything. But if we can't give Jesus the big ones, then did he have to die on the cross? I mean, seriously? I can't forgive that, Mac. Don't, Jesus says on the cross, no, don't give me that. No, I'm not going to take your how you were raised. I'm not going to do that. Jesus says, give it to me all. And if you can't give me the tough ones, then why do you have a relationship with me? It's not just like walking into church on Sunday and throwing a little change in the tray or the basket or whatever it is, the plate. And then saying, you know, Jesus, forgive me of my sins. And our Father who art in heaven, forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. No. This is the big stuff. He didn't die for the little stuff. Quit majoring in the minors. Okay, he died for the big stuff. And forgiving my mother, what a gift that Jesus allows her to have. You know, when we got done on that phone that day, I told her, I said, this is the most unselfish thing you've ever done. And she said, well, he was a bad man, and he did everything you said he did, and if it'll help somebody else, so be it. I mean, you can hear my mother's voice, very direct, precise Episcopalian woman, you know. So as you sit there and search through your resentments towards an ex, towards a parent, towards a sibling, towards your neighbor, towards whoever, let me shortcut it to the end. Forgiveness. You know, I love it and I hate it when people say, well, I guess the only thing left is to pray about it. I used to say that. I get that. But what if it's the first thing we did? What if we start with forgiveness? Jesus, I want you to help me forgive my mother. Jesus, I want you to help me to forgive my sibling. Jesus, I want you to help me to forgive my spouse or my kids or my siblings or whoever it is. Start with that, because your heart will begin to heal. You know, every time you choose to not forgive, it's like opening a gas cap in the top of your head and pouring in a gallon of Hy-Vee 24 cents off gas. You're not doing any harm to the person that you supposedly have a resentment against. You're doing harm to yourself. That's the devil's tool. It's not your fault. It's the devil's tool. You can't compete with the devil. You know, I mean, he as Jesus said, he rules this earth. And I'm not going to get into theology with you because I don't care about that right now. But if your forgiver's broken, Jesus is the one that can heal it. So I'm going to ask you to please think about somebody right now. It's 10:38, 22 minutes before 11 o'clock on the 17th day of December in 2019. We are 1 week away from Christmas Eve. I want you to dig deep. It's just you and me right here. I want you to dig deep. Who do you hold a resentment against? I'm not talking about the guy, the Quick Trip that, you know, didn't give you the right change, for heaven's sakes. I'm not talking about the neighbor, although a bad neighbor's terrible people to have. Believe me, I had them for years. But they thought I was the bad neighbor, so who knows? I forgive them, and I ask for their forgiveness. I want you to think about somebody you're carrying a resentment against, and this thing could go back. I mean, this could go back to your first year of marriage, and you're about ready to celebrate 30 years together. But every once in a while, there's this button that clicks. It's like, remember the old days when you put a key in the car and you try to start it to go, roar, 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 roar. Well, that's what this is like. The resentment is there, and Jesus wants to help you forgive, but you can't. Your forgiver's busted. The starter's busted. Just give it to him. Yes, it's a process to really forgive and forget, but it doesn't really start until you give it to him. Living free through forgiveness. What Christ has done for me is the same thing Christ will do for you. We're not special. We're his children, every one of us. And you don't have to go to church. You don't have to tell anybody that, well, I gave my resentments to Jesus. That's not what this is about. I'm not evangelical here. I'm thinking about you between the ears and the pain that you live in carrying these resentments. Give it to him. Even if you don't know if you believe in him, guess what? He believes in you. So give it to him and live free through forgiveness. Just try it. I'm a 70s child. Try it. You'll like it. Jesus is just a dude who died for all your sins. And you holding a resentment against somebody is a sin against yourself. It's not a sin against them. They don't get jack when you forgive them. You are the complete lottery winner. You're the one that gets all the advantage. When you hand something to Jesus and say, I'm not going to deal with this anymore. This person that I've been carrying this resentment for 5 minutes, 5 years, 50 years, it's not worth it anymore. I want to live free through forgiveness. So if you want to talk about this, let's talk. However I can help you, I'll be glad to help you. This is my swan song. This is what I got left. It's to write this book and then sit back and let people identify themselves as somebody who wants to talk. The Holy Spirit will help you. It will only be done through me, just like that moment with my mother in the book. Sexual abuse is a real thing. Now, we can get into that whole topic of verbal abuse, but be careful there. Abuse is a relative word. It's only good for the person who uses it as a weapon. Most abuse that people complain about didn't really happen the way they want you to believe it happens, because they believe the only way to get back at that person is to tear them down. Yeah, that's great idea. Rather than move yourself up and be a bigger person, you're going to tear the other person down so you can both be low on the totem pole. That's also a part of forgiveness. And finally, before I go, what's the reward for you forgiving somebody? It's freedom. Freedom. Whatever your God is, whatever your idol is, one of your idols is not forgiving. I just hold this on myself. Jesus can't do anything for me. Well, you don't know that because you haven't tried it. And if you have tried it, try it again. Because I'm telling you, it works. But we got to surrender. We got to melt like a snowman on a 60-degree day. Surrender and say, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I mean, imagine your impossible child at age 3 in the grocery store, which just embarrasses the living heck out of you, and you think everybody's watching, and they think you're a bad parent, and your kid's embarrassing you, and finally you yell, Calgon, take... No, that's not it. Finally, your child looks at you with tears in his eyes and says, Mommy, does Jesus love me? Yeah. I shouldn't act like this, then, should I? No, but it's okay. I love you too. And everything changes from that point on. That's the power of forgiveness. All right. Always interested in your input. Always interested in your thoughts. Be nice. I'm not easily offended, so I want constructive criticism. I don't care if on a scale of 1 to 10 you give this thing a 0. Not knowing is very unhelpful, because I am trying to figure out how to help people. And maybe I should just come in here and read the book word by word, chapter by chapter. But that's not what God tells me to do. God tells me to share my experiences with you. To hear my voice tell me what it was like to be raised in a house where your mother was never happy. And the only time she laughed was when she had a drink in her hand and she was with her brother. And many nights she would disappear into the bedroom. We had a master bedroom with a master bath before anybody else in our town did, I think. Well, that's probably not true, but we were raised pretty silver spoon. And my mom would just disappear for the evening. And I didn't know why. I just knew she was sad and she cried a lot. And when I asked her about it, I got chewed out because she didn't have the skills. She didn't have the training to go, oh my gosh, look what I'm doing to my son. It wasn't her fault. She was a victim of abuse, whether it be sexual or verbal. Oh. Be careful not to abuse the word abuse, okay? Don't become some powerful victim of abuse so you can hurt somebody else. I'm not doing this to hurt my mom. And God made sure that we knew that, because she said, you tell the story, Mac. My dad was a bad man. He did everything you said. All right. You have yourself a wonderful today's Tuesday. I have every intention of seeing you a couple more days this week. Thursdays, remember, I can't come because I have a pastor's lunch. Well, I guess it's like a late breakfast, early lunch that I go to. 5-6 guys that just, I love on them and they love on me. And so, this is a Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday thing probably. And we're going to begin to start some podcasts with some people like you. And if you want to start your own podcast, you can do that in these studios and just contact me for more information. All right. Thanks for listening. Love this job, and I couldn't do it without you. Remember, I'm challenging you. Let's go in the middle of the street and make it high noon, and we'll draw guns and see you. But rather than drawing guns, let's draw forgiveness. Just try it, would you please? Try it with somebody simple. Rather than yelling at the counter person at the grocery store, ask them. Don't ask them, I'm sorry. Say, hey, you doing all right? I'm just concerned about you. So I'm sorry if I upset you because I'm sorry. You're doing a great job. Thanks for being here. Can you imagine the difference that would make in somebody's life if we just offered forgiveness like that, let alone the big stuff? So try it. You'll like it. Just forgive. All right. It is 10:48. I'm J. Michael McCoy. And as I said, if I haven't told you lately, I love this job and I couldn't do it without you. And we are back live to 102.